To start, the legacy of the Garfield family is one that has impacted several people, and the U.S. Army Cavalry is one spot where this legacy has continued. From the inauguration of President James A. Garfield to the First and Second World Wars and beyond, several Garfield family members have served in the Ohio Cavalry, leaving an impact that deserves to be recognized. I'm here today to give a special recognition to my family's impact and the long-lasting legacy. My name is John Garfield. I'm a senior at Shaker Heights High School. I am the great-great-great-grandson to President James Garfield. Some things that I do: I'm a U.S. Naval Sea Cadet. I have career interests in becoming a U.S. Naval Aviator and a future politician. After this year, I will be attending the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina, and I will be majoring in political science while also doing Naval ROTC. So a little bit going over what we're going to talk today. We'll go over an introduction, presidential escorts, the Great War, and World War II and beyond. So Troop A, also known as the 1st City Troop, 1st Cleveland Cavalry, or the Black Horse Troop, was an independent military organization established after the railroad strike of 1877. It was created due to raised fears about the ability of an armed militia that was going to revolt against the city. It was led by Dr. Frank Wells, Augustus Stone, David Norton, John Todd, and Colonel William H. Harris, all very wealthy Clevelanders. The troop was organized on October 10th, 1877, as a military company with desires of perfecting skills in horsemanship, the use of arms, and military exercises. Initial members such as Charles Bolton, Henry Blossom, Edwin Cowles, Samuel Mather, and George Worthington. Again, very wealthy Clevelanders. So with these pictures, we have Troop A and the 1st City Troop with its armory. The company began weekly drills in 1878. Construction began on its first armory on Euclid Avenue. The company's first activities were mostly drills, encampments, social occasions, and the appearances of public ceremonies like this, weddings, inaugurations, and funerals. And on August 29th, 1877, members of the Cleveland Cavalry Troop voted unanimously to become a unit in the Ohio National Guard. The Gray's Armory, as seen on the left, built by Cleveland's long-standing private military company, the Cleveland Grays, has served as a meeting lodge and assembly hall for that group. Troop A was placed on alert several times during the 1880s and 1890s, but was not called into action. During the Spanish-American War, the troop formed the nucleus of the 1st Ohio Volunteer Cavalry, but never saw action. Reorganized after the war by members of the Veterans Association, Troop A saw action in the streets of Cleveland during the streetcar strike of 1899. Troop A would also be called into service during the Tobacco Wars in Southern Ohio. That would be in 1908, after the floods of Fremont in 1913, First and Second World Wars, and after a tornado in Lorain, Ohio. Yeah, pretty weird. The troop would also change its name several times, going from mounted horse unit to an entirely mechanized unit with tanks and jeeps. Now with these photos, the Black Horse Troop was an American military march composed by John Philip Sousa in 1924, but published in 1925. It was dedicated to the Troop A of the Ohio National Guard. Sousa's first connection with Troop A was in 1881, when he marched with the unit as a leader in the U.S. Marine Band in the funeral cortege for President James Garfield. That was our first connection. The troop continued to provide official escorts to traveling dignitaries and government officials. They later attended the International Encampment in Chicago, forming part of the escort for President Grover Cleveland. The troop escorted President Benjamin Harrison in New York to celebrate the 100th anniversary of George Washington's inauguration. And in 1892, it provided the escort for Ohio Governor at the time, William McKinley, later participating in the funeral proceedings in Fremont, Ohio, for President Hayes. And in 1896, it participated in the Cleveland Centennial Ceremonies. And in 1897, the troop escorted President William McKinley at his inauguration. Now, the first connection I'd like to point out, as I said before, is the President Garfield connection. Troop A first started off as the inaugural march, and the funeral march. Now, like I said before, with these two photos are the funeral of President James Garfield. You will notice on the left photo, guys in pretty cool and weird uniforms with plumes sticking out of their head, white trousers. Honestly, it kind of looks like they're from the British. Yeah. But those are members of the Cleveland Greys connected to Troop A. Same with on the right. And this is all downtown Cleveland. So with the second part of this presentation, more of the meaty part, we have the First World War. In 1916 to 1917, Troop A took part in a punitive expedition on the Texas-Mexican border. From the beginning of the Mexican Revolution in 1910, the United States Army was stationed in force along the border, and on several occasions fought with Mexican rebels or regular federal troops. The height of the conflict came in 1916, when Revolutionary Pancho Villa attacked the American border on the town of Columbus, New Mexico, not Ohio. In response, the United States Army, under the direction of General John Pershing, launched a punitive expedition into northern Mexico to find and capture Villa. Although Villa was not captured, the U.S. Army found and engaged Villa's rebels, killing Villa's two top lieutenants. The revolutionary himself escaped, and the American troops returned home in January of 1917. During World War I, Troop A and the Ohio Regiment of Cavalry became a field artillery unit. This means they recruited enough guys, a large amount of guys, to become in the federal service. They joined up in General John J. Pershing's American Expeditionary Forces, also known as the AEF, which led the U.S. military in Europe and played a crucial role in the Allied victory. Troop A would see action in France, fighting in the famous areas of Saint-Mihiel and the Meuse-Argonne forest. They would end up only losing 5 members in combat. The picture on the right is displaying the 1916 expedition on the Mexican border. Now, a little bit of what is a field artillery unit? What do they operate with? So, field artillery unit is broken into 2 companies with 2 different sized weapons. One company being an 87 millimeter cannon and the other a 37 millimeter cannon. On the left photo, we can see that 87 millimeter cannon in action. And on the right photo, we see a group of guys in the Meuse-Argonne offensive of 1918. So the second connection of the presentation are the Fighting Garfields. So from left to right, we have Captain John Newell Garfield, my great-great-grandfather. He was in the 134th Field Artillery, which was Troop A. In the middle, we have Major James A. Garfield II and Captain Newell Garfield, both being in the 322nd Field Artillery. Those two, the other 2 brothers, besides John, were not in Troop A. President James Garfield had a total of 8 grandchildren who served in support of the Allies in the First World War. Of all the 4 Mr. and Mrs. James Rudolph Garfield's children, 3 of the sons decided to join the military and fight for their country. That included these 3. The 4th and youngest son of James R. Garfield was Rudolph Garfield. He was too young to join. Throughout the family, the 3 of them were known as the Fighting Garfields. Now, the man I would like to harp on the most is my great-great-grandfather, John Newell Garfield, captain in the 134th Field Artillery. A part of the main reason I'm speaking here today is because of this man, Captain John Newell Garfield. His story starts when he was born February 3rd, 1892 in Chicago, Illinois. He was one of 4 children to James R. Garfield and Helen Newell Garfield. John and his brothers grew up with many advantages, as the Garfields were a prosperous and prominent Cleveland family. At the time, his father was appointed Secretary of the Interior under President Teddy Roosevelt from 1907 to 1909. John was sent off to boarding school, excelling in sports, and gaining recognition as a leader by his coaches, faculty, and classmates. Like many of his family, including his dad, his grandpa, John attended Williams College. He wouldn't finish his degree with Williams College. He would end up finishing his degree at Cornell University. After graduating in 1915, John went to marry Janet Dodge, my great-great-grandma, in 1916. John's athleticism, love for horses, and social standing in Cleveland made him a good fit for Troop A. He enlisted as a private in November of 1915. Fast forward to April 1917, the United States has entered World War I, and John's troops were redesignated into a field artillery unit, recruited up to regimental strength. John was a part of 2nd Battalion, 134th Field Artillery, formed in the American Expeditionary Forces. In April 1918, John was ordered to take the artillery officers course at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He later sailed for France on June 27, 1918, before being promoted to captain. Throughout his time in France, John saw action in the Battle of St. Mihiel and the famous Meuse-Argonne Offensive. John kept a notebook on hand, carrying family photos and letters, which he sent to his wife, children, and other family. And I'd like to point out right now that the table to your left, at the end of this, we'll have time to look at that, and when you get up close to it, you'll see a folder on the right, and a lot of those letters and pictures and maps are in that, all original. After the war, John accepted a position into the American Steel and Wire Company in Newburgh, Ohio, where he served as the superintendent of the steelmaking process. He later moved in the shipping sector of the steel industry as a manager of Isthmian Steamship Company. In 1929, the stock market crashed, kicking off the start of the Great Depression. At the start, the crash did not affect John and his family, traveling on several business trips and meeting up with family many times. For the Garfields, Great Depression didn't really harm them that much. In a desperate move, unfortunately, he took his life May 23rd, 1931, at the age of 39. John was the grandson of the Honorable President James A. Garfield, a cherished son of former Secretary of the Interior James R. Garfield, and my great-great-grandfather. I'd like to also mention that this map is also displayed on the table to your left. We'll be able to see that at the end. And then more photos. On the left, we have my great-great-grandfather, John Newell, next to his father's boss, President Teddy Roosevelt. So now the third connection to this presentation is the World War II connection. The 107th Reconnaissance Squadron. Prior to the end of World War I, the state of Ohio authorized the reformation of the 1st Ohio Cavalry. Captain Ralph Perkins reorganized Troop A, which was mustered into state services in 1920. On July 1st of 1921, the 1st Ohio Cavalry, Troop A, was redesignated as the 107th Cavalry. In November of 1940, the 107th Cavalry was reorganized and redesignated as the 107th Cavalry Regiment, horse and mechanized. Once again, going back to saying that Troop A would be renamed several different times. This is just an example of that. The 1st Squadron continued as a horse cavalry, and the 2nd Squadron became mechanized, following the outbreak of World War II. The regiment was ordered to Fort Ord, California, where they arrived on December 23, 1941. And beginning in February 1942 until March of 1942, the regiment patrolled the California coast from the Golden Gate to Carmel, California. During the spring of 1942, the regiment became completely mechanized. Now, I want to define this for you guys. Going from a horse unit to a mechanized unit is pretty big. It's a lot of money and a lot of time. They did this in less than 1 year. It's a very big thing. The entire year of 1943 was spent with the Western Defense Command patrolling the California coast. And that was about a distance about 300 miles. So they had a pretty big task, pretty big job. Huge responsibility that they could not mess up. In January of 1944, the regiment was reorganized again into a cavalry group. 1st Squadron became the 22nd Reconnaissance Squadron, and the 2nd became the 107th Reconnaissance Squadron. Colonel Ralph King was commander group. Major Charles King commanded the 22nd, and Major William McFeeters commanded the 107th Squadron. With the surrender of the Japanese at the end of World War II, the squadron was redirected to Hampton Roads, Virginia, where they landed on August 21st, 1945. The squadron was shipped to Camp Bowie, Texas, where it was deactivated on November 16th, 1945. The 107th has a continued and long history of serving the United States in both times of peace and national crisis. The 107th overall saw action on both the European side and the Pacific side. So this photo, it represents a cross-connection between families married into the Garfields. By World War I, the Garfield family began to cross-serve with fellow wealthy Cleveland families. One family being the Brown family. Through marriage, my great-grandfather, his wife, and his best friends would continue to fight for our nation and influence the Garfield military legacy. A little bit about the two families in this photo. My great-grandpa, also known as Jim, as they was called, and his mother, Janet. Brothers and sisters around him, with the addition of his wife, Mary, and her family. Alexander C. Brown, in the way back, third from the left. A wealthy industrialist and businessman. He had a lot of money. And the two sons seated in front of him, both in uniform. My uncle, Lieutenant Ted Brown, would go on to be killed in action in July 1944 in the Normandy, France region, earning the coveted Purple Heart and Bronze Star. My Uncle Ted is the main reason why I'm doing what I want to do today and why I wish to pursue a career in the military. And my other uncle, seated next to him, Lieutenant Alec Brown, would stay stateside during the war. My Uncle Alec is in the darker dress uniform in the middle. My Uncle Ted is on the right of him, and then Grandpa Jim is on the left. This combination of family military service would impact many around the world, especially Cleveland. Several news articles would be written about them, not only from World War I, but also World War II. Once again, these are those three heroes. I like to title this The Brothers in Arms. I think this is the perfect photo that would go along with these guys. From left to right, we have Lieutenant Colonel James R. Garfield II, my great-grandfather. In the middle, we have Captain Alexander C. Brown II, also known as Alec. He was in the 107th as well. And then on the right, my Uncle Ted, First Lieutenant Edward Dana Brown, and the 106th Cavalry. At one point, all three of these guys were in the same unit, but my Uncle Ted, because he wanted to serve and fight in war, sought a new position in the 106th Cavalry and went to Normandy, France. Now, the fourth connection I'd like to make is about my grandfather, my Grandpa Jim. He'd be one of the last in the men of the Ohio Cavalry for the Garfield family. Jim would conclude his service as Lieutenant Colonel, earning several ribbons. A legacy ended, well carried, and not forgotten. On the left is a dinner photo. Jim is seen third from the left next to my grandmother, Sally. And on the right is my Grandpa Jim's high school senior year photo. As you can kind of compare, we look alike. For those in the Cleveland area, he did graduate from a university school. I went to Shaker. We don't like that school, so. To act, not to speak. The motto of the 107th Cavalry is derived from the essence of the famous 1st Cleveland Cavalry, Troop A, built on honor, integrity, and courage. The legacy of not only the Cleveland military, but those who served in them. From the inauguration of President James Garfield to the trenches of World War I, the beaches of Normandy, and the War on Terror. The Garfield legacy continues to live on. Who knows what Troop A and the Cleveland Cavalry would look like if the Garfields were not in it. Garfields are taught to act with spirit and speak with honesty, to act, not to speak. My name is John Garfield, and I'd like to thank you all for coming. At this point, I'd like to open up to any questions that you guys may have.
What did that map show? The different lines in the map?
Yes. So the map that I displayed on the screen was a town of Chambly, France. It's the northern part of France. Think of Paris in the top right, and the top part, this is just to the right. This is outlining the Meuse-Argonne offensive, which is the last major offensive of the First World War in September to November of 1918. and it's kind of hard to see, but the red line, the map's up here when we are finished with this, but the red line is outlining the Allied and Axis powers, the northern part of that being the German line, and the southern part being the American line. Now, once you take a look at it up closer, you'll see a town called Damphitalks. That is where John Noel Garfield, my great-great-grandfather, had his battery. It was also known as the Garfield sector. And a lot of that is in the files displayed on the table.
Whose jacket?
The service jacket on the left would be my Grandpa Jim's. That would be displaying the Woodland uniform, most likely in the 1970s. And you'll see, when you get closer, a rank tab on the left being symbolizing his rank of a major.
Was President Garfield, was he in the Cavalry? Was that in the Cleveland area, or?
Well, so actually, I guess you could define it as this, but when Garfield entered the Civil War, he was already a state senator at the time, and he was promoted quickly to a lieutenant colonel. He was in the 42nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. That wouldn't be classified as a cavalry, although they did ride on horses, so I guess we could say that as well. But he was in the 42nd Ohio Volunteer Infantry.
When you were doing your research, did you find anything that surprised you about any of these members of your family?
Oh. When I did some research, I did find from a book, actually, that John Noel, my great-great-grandfather, was actually attending in Chicago, Illinois, a Chicago Cubs game, baseball game. And in 2 rows in front of him was Al Capone. It was Al Capone, yes. It was Al Capone. I just realized it. Yeah, 2 rows in front of him was Al Capone and a couple of his guys smoking cigars. And he has it written down on, Mr. Garfield has it written down on pieces of paper that Al Capone was smoking a cigar. And I thought that was pretty crazy.
I've had the honor to work with the Garfield for a bunch of years. And I heard you folks got to go over to France and look at the cemetery where one of your relatives is buried. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, we did go to, I was very fortunate enough to go on a trip to France for my sister's band trip. I wasn't originally in band, and I ended up stopping, but because my sister was in it, I still got to go. So that trip was to Normandy, France, and Paris, France. The Normandy part we were very lucky to be able to go on. It was a no-brainer for my dad and the rest of my family because we found out we were visiting the Normandy American Cemetery, a very famous American cemetery for World War II veterans, housing over, I think, 3,900 service members. Now, why do we care so much about that cemetery? It's because of my Uncle Ted again, on the right. He was killed in Normandy, France, July 7th, 1944, received the Purple Heart and Bronze Star, as I said. And we had the fortunate opportunity of meeting with a representative there and performing a small ceremony for him at his grave. We took sand from Omaha Beach, rubbed it in the inscription on his grave, and placed 2 flags, one being the American flag and one being the French flag. Took several photos, had an amazing time. It was a really amazing trip.
My brother-in-law that I didn't know died at Omaha Beach too, but the family brought his body back and he's buried at Lakeview.
Yes, ma'am. So a lot of to go off that comment, the Brown family, as I said, as well with the help of the Garfield family, decided to keep my Uncle Ted overseas because he wanted to be with his guys. And there are also several of his men that were in his unit, all lying next to him.
Thank you so much for joining us today.